Winter quarter of 1982. I found myself at Shoreline Community College after taking one of those career evaluation tests. The ones the counseling centers gave me when I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Number 1 on my list was nursing, and number 2, journalist. At the time, Shoreline had one of the earliest 2-year RN programs I had ever heard of, and the competition was stiff. Most mornings, a group of us would gather in the school cafeteria before heading off to classes, and meet for study group when things were done. Ours was an open group where friends of friends were welcomed. One day, a newbie by the name of Karen was invited to sit with us. Karen was from New York City, in her late 20s, with curly brown hair, and always seemed to be wearing a blue puffy type jacket to keep her warm. A few days later, another new face appeared at the table, and he introduced himself as Jake the Snake and pulled up a chair behind Karen. Jake looked like he had walked out of a Mark Twain novel, perhaps Tom Sawyer. Jake was Native American, in his late 30s, early 40s, and Karen's partner. He stood about 5'10" with straight black hair that rested on his eyebrows, a square jaw that narrowed down to a sharp point, dark, sunken eyes, unshaven, and had a slender build. Jake was a Vietnam vet who was attending school on the GI Bill. Jake was one of the kindest people I had ever met, not a mean bone in his body. He had a love for all things knives, cooking knives, hunting knives, throwing knives, combat, self-defense, and the list went on. Jake enjoyed setting up targets in his basement and practiced throwing. As was often the case, one thing led to another, and Jake happened to mention he was carrying a switchblade in his jacket. To me, a switchblade was the ghetto of all knives. The closest thing I had come was a spring-loaded comb. I asked Jake if I could see it. Jake turned his back to the cafeteria, faced the wall, opened one flap of his leather jacket, forming a shield, and carefully produced the knife. As I examined it, it was pretty obvious I had no clue as to what I was doing, and if I did open it, I might end up injuring myself. So he took the knife from my hands and showed me how to operate the safety and the switch. Once I understood how to open it, I was just as equally baffled on how to close it. The blade was about 8 inches long, thin, and so sharp you could cut a snowflake with it. The only weapon I knew growing up was a police baton Dad had picked up on one of his trips to Kuwait when he worked for Iran Air. Back in those days, when they had the Hajj, they would send him to maintain the aeroplane. When we lived in Iran, he always kept it in the bottom drawer of his work table. The baton was expandable and would open with a flick of the wrist. Dad said the Kuwaiti police carried them around on patrol with them. It was made of steel, and the last section included a 3/4 inch solid metal spring. After moving from Tehran to Seattle, Mom decided she needed to carry it around in her purse for self-defense, in case she ever crossed paths with the ever-elusive J.P. Patches or Gertrude in the dark alley. As fate would have it, one evening she would have it confiscated as she and Dad walked through airport security at SeaTac. Back in those days, visitors could walk up to the gate to meet their guests. After Mom set the alarm off, the security agent found the weapon in her purse and informed her blackjacks were illegal in Washington state and confiscated it. They said if she had tried to use it, she was more likely to hurt herself than get any defense out of it. Mom was upset they had found it. Dad was not happy Mom had taken to carrying it around without his knowledge. Like the blackjack, I knew switchblades were illegal to carry around. I wanted one for my collection. I asked Jake if he would sell me his knife. We settled on the price, and after bringing it home, I locked it up in my trunk of magical items. Around the time I was going to Shoreline Community College, I worked the evening shift at Northwest Hospital, hoping it might give me a leg up after I earned my nursing degree. The money I made from working, along with a scholarship I was awarded, paid for college. Dad still needed my help with the rentals, but we were pretty much done with the apartment on 56th Street. And the house Brother would buy was still a couple of years away. At Northwest Hospital, I worked in the storeroom, delivering medical supplies, making deliveries for the pharmacy, and twice a shift I pushed a cart into each hospital wing to haul away the soiled linen and trash. There were rules about how to dispose of needles in little red boxes, but not everyone followed them. One evening, as I waited in the pharmacy for my cart to be prepared, I overheard the pharmacist and a couple of nurses discussing a woman who had been admitted into the ER early that morning with severe stomach cramps. It turned out she was having a baby. The staff couldn't understand how anyone could go 9 months and not figure out they were pregnant. As I traveled from floor to floor using the freight elevators, I passed the maternity ward, and there, standing in the middle of the hallway, was my old buddy, Jake the Snake. As I approached Jake, I noticed he had a stunned look about him, and his eyes were staring off into space. He didn't even notice my approach. Jake was visibly shaken, and the rich color drained from his face. I asked him what he was doing there. He informed me Karen had just given birth to a baby girl. The only problem was, neither of them knew she was pregnant. Jake was trying to come to terms with things and was not sure what to do. He was much older than Karen and had not prepared for anything like this. Jake asked if we could talk. The Shoreline College group had seen Karen almost every day for the last 5 or 6 months, and none of us had a clue either. There was no way I could fully understand what Jake was going through, so I listened. We talked a while, and I came to the realization the stuff Jake was sharing with me, you really needed to be discussing it with Karen and a hospital social worker. 2 days later, I was back at the hospital working my shift, hoping to see Jake, and learned they had checked out and disappeared. I never saw them again. Not at the hospital, not at the college, as if they had vanished into thin air. It's hard to know why certain people come into our lives. The only thing I do know is that there are no such thing as random meetings. There's usually a reason.